At my own birthday dinner, my mother leaned across the table, smiling like a queen giving orders. "While everyone's here," she whispered to my dad, "tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment." The clinking fork stopped. My brother didn't question, just stood up and left like it was normal to break into your sister's life on her birthday. For an hour, laughter turned into whispers. Then he came back pale as the tablecloth shaking. "Mom, there's something," he said. Her smile vanished. My stomach dropped. Whatever he saw at my apartment wasn't supposed to be found. When people talk about family, they picture warmth. Birthday candles, laughter, hugs that mean something. Mine always looked the part. Perfect smiles and Christmas photos, matching sweaters, polite small talk about vacations and promotions. But behind that, everything was a performance. My mother, Mrs. Reeves, was the director. My father, her silent investor, and my brother Nathan, the star of every act. Since I was little, I knew my role. Stay quiet. Don't ruin the image. If Nathan forgot to call, Mom said he's busy. If I missed one dinner, she said, "You're selfish." Somehow, every flaw became mine. I used to think if I worked harder, achieved more, maybe she'd finally look at me the way she looked at him. But control doesn't stop when you start succeeding. It just changes form. That night at the restaurant, her whisper wasn't random. She had planned it. I could see it in the way she arranged the seating, Nathan next to Dad, me opposite, like an audience member. Even the cake had his favorite flavor, not mine. And when she said, "While everyone's here," she wasn't just talking about convenience. She wanted witnesses. She wanted power. Dad didn't question her either. He never did. Decades of keeping peace had turned him into an echo. He muttered, "Do it after dessert," like it was a grocery list. My brother nodded, eager to please, eager to obey. I remember tracing my finger along the rim of my glass, pretending not to hear, pretending not to care. But inside, my chest burned. Change the locks at my apartment. Why? What had I done this time? I had my own place for 3 years, a small apartment in Portland where I lived with my son Liam. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, my safe place. No one had a key except me. Or so I thought. When Nathan left the table, I stayed still. Mom chatted with relatives, her voice sweet again, as if she hadn't just ordered a break-in. My father smiled weakly, swirling his wine, pretending not to notice my silence. I excused myself to the restroom just to breathe. The mirror reflected a calm woman, neat hair, lipstick intact. No one could see the storm behind her eyes. By the time I returned, an hour had passed. Nathan was back, pale and shaking. He leaned toward Mom, his voice cracking. "There's something you need to see." Her expression stiffened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes darting to me. "There's police tape around her door." The table fell silent. My mother's fork slipped from her hand. I didn't move, didn't blink, because in that moment, I realized the real dinner hadn't even started yet. The drive home felt endless. Street lights flashed over the windshield like heartbeat monitors, steady but cold. My phone buzzed nonstop, Mom, Dad, even Nathan, but I didn't answer. The city outside looked normal, but I could feel something shifting, something that wouldn't go back to the way it was. When I pulled into my apartment complex, 2 police cruisers were parked near the entrance. Blue and red lights pulsed against the brick walls. My stomach twisted. I barely remember getting out of the car, just the sound of gravel under my heels, and a uniformed officer stepping toward me. "Ms. Reeves," he asked. "I'm Officer Grant. Are you the tenant of Unit 214? "Yes." "What's going on?" He checked his notes. "We received a report of a break-in. Your door was forced open, but nothing appears to be stolen. We've sealed it for investigation." I blinked, trying to process. "A break-in? Who would?" He paused. "Do you know anyone who might have a copy of your keys?" My throat tightened. "My brother Nathan Reeves?" The officer glanced up sharply. "And why would your brother have your keys?" I hesitated. "Because my mother told him to." He stared at me for a moment, pen hovering. "Told him to do what? Change my locks." He exhaled through his nose, writing something down. "That's quite an instruction." "I didn't give permission," I said quietly. He nodded. "We'll review the building footage. You should stay with someone tonight." But I didn't move. I couldn't, because through the cracked door I could see my living room. Nothing was destroyed, nothing missing. except the feeling of safety. And then I saw it. The photos of me and Liam on the wall had been turned face down, one by one. "Officer," I whispered, "those photos." He stepped closer, flashlight sweeping the room. On the coffee table lay a single white envelope. He handed me gloves. "You should open it." Inside was a short printed message. "Tell your mother the truth always finds its way home." My fingers trembled. Grant frowned. "Does that mean anything to you?" I shook my head, but my heart knew better. The words weren't for me, they were a warning to her. Somewhere between that restaurant and this moment, the control my mother built was cracking. She just didn't know it yet. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the envelope again, those printed words staring back at me like a dare. By morning, the rain hadn't stopped. It hit the windows in hard, uneven bursts, the kind that makes silence feel louder. When my phone rang, I thought it was Mom. It wasn't. "Ms. Reeves, this is Officer Grant." His voice was steady, professional. "We traced a payment made to a man named Thomas Hale, the building's maintenance assistant. It came from a bank account under your mother's name." For a second, I didn't breathe. "You're sure?" "Completely. The note and the timing line up. We believe your mother may have hired him to retrieve something from your apartment." Retrieve what I asked, though I already knew. Grant hesitated. "That's what we're trying to determine. I suggest you speak to her directly but carefully." After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, pulse pounding. Hired a man. My mother, who preached about reputation and trust, had committed a crime to invade my life. I remembered the box in my closet, the one labeled Dad's business papers. I had found it last month while cleaning. Inside were property deeds, statements, wire transfers, documents signed with my name. I thought it was an accident, a clerical mix-up, but now I understood. Those weren't mistakes. They were camouflage. By late afternoon, I'd made up my mind. I texted her dinner, my place. 7 p.m., no games this time. Her reply came instantly. "Fine, but be ready for the truth." When 7 came, the knock was light, deliberate, just like her. My mother stepped in, perfume and confidence filling the room. "You shouldn't have involved the police," she said. I crossed my arms. "You shouldn't have hired a man to break into my home." Her lips tightened. "You don't understand what's happening. Then explain it." She glanced around, eyes lingering on the flipped photos. "Those papers you found your father's business isn't simple. Thomas was supposed to retrieve them quietly before you did something reckless." I laughed softly. "You mean before I found out you've been using my name to hide your fraud?" Her face hardened. "Watch your tone, Evelyn." But this time I didn't lower my voice. "No, Mom. Watch yours." Thunder rolled outside like the sky had been waiting for her to show up. Rain streaked across the window, sliding down in crooked lines that caught the light from the street lamps. My mother stood in the middle of my living room, perfectly still, perfectly put together, heels polished pearls glowing against her black coat. If guilt had a dress code, she'd nailed it. "I was protecting you," she said, voice calm, almost gentle. I tilted my head. "By breaking into my home—" "You don't understand," she said, pacing. "Your father's business has complications, partnerships that can't be made public. If those papers were discovered, it would ruin us." "Us?" I asked. "Or just you?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't twist this. Everything your father and I have done was to secure this family's future." I almost laughed. "You used my name, Mom. You forged my signature on property deeds and transfer forms. You didn't secure the future, you stole it." Her voice rose, breaking through the hum of the storm. "You think you're some kind of victim. Everything we have you benefited from, college tuition, your first car, that apartment. Do you think those things just appeared? I paid for that apartment myself. I said every word sharp and measured. You just couldn't stand that something had my name on it, without your fingerprints all over it." For the first time, her expression flickered. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of losing control. She turned toward the window, hiding it. "Evelyn, listen to me carefully. If those documents go public, your father could face prison time." I folded my arms. "Maybe he should." She spun back around. "You wouldn't dare." "I already did," I said softly. "Officer Grant has them." Her face drained of color. "What?" "You wanted the truth out of my house. I delivered it to the police." Lightning flashed across the glass, bright enough to cut her silhouette in half. For a moment, she didn't look like my mother anymore, just a woman cornered by her own lies. "You're destroying your family," she whispered. I stepped closer. "No, Mom. You did that the moment you used me as your shield." She shook her head, stepping back as if I'd struck her. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I do," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. Something you never taught me how to do." The air between us thickened. Every word, every silence, every wound we'd both ignored was suddenly there, alive, breathing. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but rage. "You think you're strong. Because you've got the law on your side, you're naive. The world doesn't care about your little revenge." I looked at her steadily. "It's not revenge, Mom. It's accountability." She laughed, cold and brittle. "You'll regret this." Maybe I said, but at least it'll be my regret. The room went quiet except for the rain. Somewhere outside, a car horn echoed distant and hollow. She stood there, chest rising and falling fast like she was about to lunge or cry or both. Finally, she said it. "If you go through with this, you'll never have a family again." I met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time I build one worth having." She froze. Her face hardened, mask sliding back into place. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. The click of her heels against the hardwood was the sound of a legacy breaking apart. Before she reached the handle, I said, "One more thing." She stopped, didn't turn. "You asked why someone flipped the photos in my apartment," I said. "Maybe because even strangers can tell which way is right side up." Her hand trembled just once before she pulled the door open and disappeared into the storm. The sound of thunder followed her out. For a long time, I stood there watching the door sway slightly from the draft. My hands shook not from fear, but from release. I walked to the table where the envelope still lay. I picked it up, tore it in half, then dropped it into the trash. This time, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like ownership. The next morning, I met Officer Grant at the station. My hair was still damp, the air outside heavy with leftover rain. He greeted me with a small nod. "You're sure about this?" "I'm done covering for them," I said. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were photos of the documents, copies of the bank statements, and confirmation that my parents' assets were being frozen pending investigation. "Once this goes to the Financial Crimes Division," he said, "they'll open a full case. You'll be cleared of all liability." I exhaled slowly. "Good." He hesitated. "You know this will make headlines." "I know," I said, "but at least they'll be true." By the time I left the precinct, the clouds had started to break apart. Sunlight spilled through in thin, uneven rays, the kind that look hesitant, like they're not sure they belong yet. When I got to the hospital to pick up Liam, he was waiting with a sticker on his shirt, a gold star. He ran straight into my arms. "Mom, look, I got a star for being brave." I smiled. "So did I, sweetheart. You just can't see mine yet." He giggled, not understanding, and for once I didn't need him to. We drove home in silence, his little hand resting on my arm. The world outside smelled clean, washed new. When we got back, I made pancakes, the kind he liked with too much syrup and not enough patience. He talked about school, his friends, how he wanted to build a rocket in the backyard. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was chasing me. There were still calls I hadn't returned, messages from reporters I didn't plan to answer. Let them talk. The truth didn't need my permission anymore. That night after Liam went to bed, I stood by the window again. The city lights blinked in the distance, reflected in the rain still clinging to the glass. I thought about my parents not with anger this time, but clarity. They taught me the difference between love and control, between loyalty and silence. And somewhere between their lies and my truth, I'd finally found myself. The next morning, I walked into the post office with one final envelope in my hand. Inside were the remaining documents linking my parents' offshore accounts. No note, no message, just the truth. When I sealed it, I whispered, "This ends here." Outside, the air was bright, cool, honest. I turned toward the street where my car waited, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood: peace. News travels fast when scandal smells like money. Within a week, every local outlet had picked up the story. Prominent couple under federal review for identity fraud. My phone lit up nonstop. Journalists, lawyers, relatives pretending to check in. I didn't answer a single one. The world could speculate all it wanted. I was done explaining myself. The apartment was quiet now. The flipped photos had been rehung, every frame straightened. Liam's laughter filled the space where fear used to echo. Sometimes late at night, I still caught myself expecting the phone to ring with her name on it. But it never did. Not out of guilt, out of shame. Dad resigned from his company the same day the investigation became public. The firm released a one-line statement about health reasons. Mom vanished from her social circles, her charity events, her book club. For a woman who lived off appearances, silence was the only punishment that fit. Officer Grant called a few days later. "You've been fully cleared, Ms. Reeves. The case is moving forward." "Thank you," I said, "for believing me." He paused. "You didn't need me to believe you. You just needed to believe yourself." After we hung up, I looked around my living room, the same one that had been invaded, violated, reclaimed. The air felt lighter, like the space itself was breathing again. I poured a cup of coffee and opened the window. Outside, the city sounded alive. Horn's footsteps, the soft hum of a place that didn't care who you used to be. That weekend, I invited a few friends over for dinner, people who had stayed when everything fell apart. We didn't talk about my parents. We didn't have to. Naina raised her glass and said, "To freedom, and to never apologizing for protecting yourself." I smiled. "I'll drink to that." Later, after everyone left, I tucked Liam into bed. He mumbled, half asleep, "Are we safe now, Mom?" I brushed his hair back. "Yes, baby. We are." He sighed and drifted off, and for the first time in years, I didn't doubt the words that came out of my mouth. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, soft and gold. Liam sat at the table, kicking his legs syrup on his cheek. I flipped pancakes, watching the light move across the floor like it was tracing new boundaries, ones that finally belonged to me. I'd spent years trying to keep the peace. Turns out, peace isn't something you keep. It's something you claim. As I poured coffee, I looked at my son and smiled. This time I said softly, "The locks stay mine." If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after family betrayal, share your story below and hit subscribe. You're not alone here.
My name is Wendy Rivera. I'm 27 years old and I was once someone's starter girlfriend. It's a title I never asked for, but one I'll never forget. People talk about first loves like they're sacred, but no one warns you about being the practice run the woman a man uses to figure out what he wants before moving on to someone better. When Kevin Bennett called me that, he said it like a joke, like it didn't cost me the version of myself that believed love meant loyalty. I met Kevin when I was 23. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and seemed to pull the air with him, confident, charming, the kind who made you feel seen when his eyes met yours. I, on the other hand, was quieter, practical. I had already been working full-time as a project coordinator at an architecture firm. I loved my routines, my small apartment, my peace. Kevin was still finishing his degree in marketing. He called me steady, said I was different from the girls he usually met, that I made him feel grounded. Back then, I thought that was a compliment. We started dating quickly. Within months, we were inseparable. He'd study late at my place while I worked on reports beside him. On weekends, we'd cook, take walks, talk about the future. He said things like, "When I graduate, we'll move somewhere new, start fresh." I believed him. When he moved into my apartment, I offered to cover the larger share of rent. He insisted he'd make it up to me soon. I didn't mind. I figured we were a team, and teams help each other through uneven seasons. Looking back, the cracks were there early, just quiet. Kevin loved being the center of attention. His friends were loud, glamorous, the kind who measured success in nights out and Instagram stories. Whenever we went out together, I always felt like the background character to his show. They'd tease him. "So when are you going to upgrade, man? Don't tell me you're settling down already." He'd laugh. Never defend me, just laugh, that low, charming sound that made people adore him. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that love wasn't a performance. But the small things started to pile up, the subtle digs, the jokes at my expense. When I'd suggest staying in and watching a movie, he'd smirk. "You're so predictable." When I surprised him with a weekend cabin trip, he'd sigh. "That's cute, but couldn't you plan something more exciting?" It didn't matter how much effort I put in. Kevin always made me feel like I was enough, but never extraordinary. Still, I stayed, because I believed love was about patience, about showing up, about proving that stability could outlast excitement. The night everything changed wasn't special at first. It was a Friday he'd asked me to come out with him and a few of his friends to celebrate someone's promotion. I almost said no. I was exhausted from work. But he said, "Come on, Wendy. It won't be the same without you." So I went. The place was one of those trendy bars where the music is too loud to think and the lights make everyone look more glamorous than they are. Kevin thrived in those spaces. He laughed louder than anyone, told stories like he was auditioning for a movie, and his friends cheered him on. I sat beside him, smiling, sipping my drink, watching him glow. I told myself this was what compromise looked like. At some point, one of his friends leaned across the table, a woman named Tasha, with a mischievous grin, and asked, "So Kevin is Wendy the one? Are we hearing wedding bells soon?" The table erupted with laughter. I expected Kevin to roll his eyes, maybe say something playful like, "Who knows, maybe someday." Instead, he raised his glass and said with that easy smile, "She's perfect for now, my starter girlfriend." They howled. Someone even clinked his glass and said, "Like a starter home." Kevin laughed hard, and I just sat there smiling like my heart hadn't just cracked open in front of everyone. Their laughter blurred. The music drowned beneath the rush in my ears. It felt like falling in slow motion, the world bright and dizzy, his face still glowing under the lights as if he hadn't just reduced me to a rehearsal. He kept talking, the conversation moved on, but for me, time stopped there. That moment became a mark I couldn't wash off. When we finally left, I didn't say a word. I remember the sound of my heels on the pavement, the cold air, his voice carefree beside me. He didn't notice my silence. Maybe he never really did. Inside the car, I stared out the window, replaying it again and again. Starter girlfriend. Safe. Predictable. Good enough for practice. I should have known right then that everything would change. But denial is softer than truth, and I wasn't ready to wake up yet. The drive home was silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost alive, like even the air knows something's about to break. Kevin hummed along to the radio, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. I sat there staring at the blur of streetlights, trying to understand how someone could hum after calling me practice. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, too calm. "Kevin, what did you mean earlier, starter girlfriend?" He glanced at me briefly, then looked back at the road. "Oh, come on, Wendy. Don't tell me you're taking that seriously. It was just a joke." It didn't sound like a joke. He sighed, the kind of sigh that said he was already tired of the conversation. "You always overthink things. I was just trying to make them laugh. Don't make it a big deal. You said I was a starter girlfriend, someone to practice on until you're ready for the real thing." My voice cracked at the word starter, and I hated that it did. Kevin chuckled under his breath. "You really don't get how jokes work, do you? Relax. Not everything I say is some deep confession." That word relax burned more than the insult itself. It was the tone. That light, dismissive tone that told me my pain was inconvenient to him. I turned toward him. "Is that really how you see me?" "Temporary." He kept his eyes on the road. "Wendy, come on, you're young. We're both figuring life out. I'm not saying you're not great. You just, don't have to think this is forever." I stared at him, trying to recognize the man I'd once believed in. He looked the same messy hair, same jawline, same half smile that used to make me feel safe. But the way he said forever like it was a childish word made me realize we were strangers sitting in the same car. I whispered, "I thought we were building something together." He didn't answer. He just turned up the volume on the radio. That was when I knew. The man I loved was gone, or maybe he'd never been who I thought he was. When we got back to the apartment, Kevin walked in like nothing had happened. He tossed his keys on the counter, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed on the couch. "You're really going to sulk all night over this?" he asked, reaching for the remote. "I told you it was a joke." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out my duffel bag. The sound of the zipper caught his attention. "What are you doing?" "Leaving." He blinked. "Wait, seriously? Over one comment." I folded a sweater, placed it inside, and zipped the bag shut. "It's not just one comment, Kevin. It's what it means. You called me your starter girlfriend. You think I'm just a chapter before the real story starts." He scoffed, incredulous. "You're being dramatic." I looked up at him, really looked the man who once told me I made him feel grounded, now looked like a stranger balancing on his own ego. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done pretending this is love." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he leaned back against the couch and muttered, "Fine, go ahead. If you want to throw everything away over one joke that's on you, you'll regret it." I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked to the door. "Maybe," I said softly, "but at least I'll regret it on my own terms." I left the apartment key on the table. The click of the door behind me felt louder than it should have, final, like a seal closing. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, breathing, trembling, realizing that silence could feel both painful and free. He thought I'd come back, that I'd text him in the morning, apologize, call it a misunderstanding. But I didn't. For the first time in years, I didn't chase after someone who made me feel small. That night, I lay awake on my friend Natalie's couch, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him laughing at that table. Starter girlfriend. The words looped like an echo I couldn't turn off. I tried to imagine him missing me, the way I'd cooked for him, stayed up, helping him prep for interviews, listened when he was unsure of his future. But I knew he wasn't thinking about that. He was probably out drinking, brushing off what happened, telling himself I'd get over it. He didn't know that something had shifted, that I'd finally hit the quiet kind of breaking point, the kind that doesn't explode, it just decides. And once I decide, I don't go back. The first morning after leaving Kevin, I woke up in a stranger's apartment. Well, not a stranger's. My friend Natalie had insisted I crash at her place, but when I opened my eyes and saw the unfamiliar ceiling, the reality hit me like a second heartbreak. This wasn't my home anymore. The life I'd built, the routines I'd loved, they all existed in a space I couldn't return to. I stayed in bed for hours, staring at the light crawling across the wall. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, I was, but because the sadness had already drained into something quieter. Exhaustion. Acceptance. When Natalie knocked softly and peeked in, I just whispered, "I'm fine." It was the first lie of many. The days blurred together at first. I went to work, smiled when I had to keep my voice steady in meetings. But every night when I came back to Natalie's tiny guest room, I replayed everything. The laughter at that table, the way he'd said starter girlfriend like it meant nothing, the way I'd loved him anyway. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after leaving someone who never truly saw you. It's not peace, not yet. It's an empty echo, the absence of noise where his voice used to be. At first I hated it, but over time I started realizing something, that silence was mine. For once, no one was talking over me. No one was telling me I was too serious, too quiet, too predictable. I began to fill the silence differently. I started cooking again, not for him, not to impress anyone, but for me. I'd forgotten how much I loved the sound of a pan sizzling, the smell of garlic and butter filling the kitchen. I went for walks after work, headphones and music that used to make me cry, now just sounding like background noise. One morning I even joined the gym across from my office, the same one Kevin used to mock as a waste of money. I told myself I'd stay busy, but something deeper was happening. Every small thing I did for myself started feeling like rebellion, a quiet personal revenge. It took about 2 weeks before his first message came, a simple, "Hey, how are you?" I stared at it for 10 minutes and didn't reply. 2 days later, "I hope you're okay, we should talk." Then, "I miss you." 3 words that used to mean everything now felt like dust. I didn't respond. Every message after that went unread, because I knew what he was doing, trying to see if I'd still orbit around him. He wanted proof that he still mattered. But I was done giving him proof. A month passed, then 2. And with every day that I didn't answer, I felt something inside me shifting, rebuilding, reforming into someone stronger, someone lighter. I noticed little things. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped replaying our last conversation in my head. And one morning I caught my reflection and realized I was smiling. Not because I was happy yet, but because I was free. One Friday night, Natalie came home with a bottle of wine. "You've been way too quiet lately. We're going out." I hesitated, but she was right. It was time. We went to a small rooftop bar, nothing like the loud places Kevin loved. The air was soft, the city lights below us glittering like scattered glass. As I sat there, I realized something. It wasn't the world that had become kinder. It was me finally giving myself permission to breathe. I no longer needed someone to make my life exciting. Peace was thrilling enough. Back at home later that night, I journaled for the first time in years. I wrote one sentence over and over. I gave him stability, and he mistook it for boredom. I looked at that line for a long time. Then I crossed out him and replaced it with myself. I gave myself stability, and for the first time it feels like freedom. 3 months after I walked out of Kevin's apartment, I stopped counting the days since we'd last spoken. Not because I forgot him, but because remembering started to feel unnecessary. Life had quietly rearranged itself. My work was steady. I'd found a rhythm: early mornings, gym, cooking, silence. Real silence. The kind that didn't ache anymore. And then one ordinary Thursday evening, my phone lit up. Kevin Bennett. Hey, stranger. Miss you. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding just once, not from longing, but from surprise at how little the message affected me. A few months ago, those words would have wrecked me. Now they just felt small. I locked the phone and went back to stirring my pasta. I didn't reply. A week later, another text arrived. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I didn't mean what I said that night. You know that, right? The arrogance in that last sentence made me laugh. Of course he thought I knew he didn't mean it, as if that would erase the truth behind his words. I blocked his number. That should have been the end of it, but Kevin never liked losing. 2 weeks later, he found another way in my email. Subject, please read. Wendy, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have said what I said. You're not just a starter girlfriend. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I miss you more than you think. Can we talk, please? I hovered over the delete button. Part of me wanted to reply, not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to say everything I hadn't said before, but I didn't. Silence was still my loudest answer. That's when the mutual friends started showing up again. Tasha, the same one who'd laughed at the starter girlfriend joke, texted me out of nowhere. Hey, I saw Kevin recently. He's not doing great. Says he misses you. Maybe hear him out. I almost replied, did he tell you why we broke up? But I didn't owe anyone explanations, least of all his audience. Later, I found out through social media that Kevin had started dating someone new, Madison Clark. I recognized her face from his old stories. She was the kind of woman who made an entrance all bright lipstick and loud laughter like life itself was a performance. For a moment, the sight of them together stung. He looked happy, or at least he looked like he wanted the world to believe that. But I told myself, let him have his spotlight. Some people can't breathe without it. Months passed. Kevin and Madison became the fun couple, online matching outfits, endless parties, captions about new beginnings. It almost became a running joke between Natalie and me. The man who hated taking pictures suddenly became a travel influencer. She'd laugh, handing me her phone. I'd smile. But quietly, I knew something she didn't. Performers always tire of their own stage. By the 4th month, I started noticing small changes in their posts. Fewer photos. No more hashtags about love. Then cryptic quotes appeared on Madison's page. Some lessons come wrapped in heartbreak. Never lose yourself trying to keep someone else. I didn't need to ask what happened. Kevin's pattern was predictable. He loved the chase, not the commitment. And right on cue, a new message arrived. Kevin, I made a mistake. Can we please talk? Then another. You were right. About everything. I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance. Then another. Please, just coffee. 1 hour. I'll come to you. I didn't reply to any of them. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because the woman he was trying to reach didn't exist anymore. He broke her that night in the car. And I had no intention of resurrecting her for his redemption arc. I thought silence would end things. But Kevin had one last act left in him. One evening, I came home from work to find an envelope under my apartment door. My name written on it, his handwriting. Inside a handwritten letter. Wendy, I've tried to say this every way I know how, but nothing feels right. You're the only woman who ever made me better. I was stupid scared, and I took you for granted. You called me temporary that night, and you were right, but not because I didn't love you. I just didn't know how to love you right. Please give me another chance to prove it. Kevin. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if neatness could rewrite history. I folded the letter back, sealed it again, and walked it straight to the trash chute. That night I slept soundly. For the first time in months, I didn't dream about him at all, just silence. Soft, peaceful final. A full year passed before I saw him again. It was a Saturday night in early spring, one of those evenings that carries a hint of warmth in the air, the kind that makes the city feel alive again after months of cold. Natalie had dragged me to a birthday party for a mutual friend. I almost said no, but she insisted. It's time you show your face again, Wendy. You've been hiding long enough. I wasn't hiding, not really. I just didn't crave attention anymore. I liked my quiet life. But maybe she was right. Maybe closure sometimes wears the face of a crowd. The bar was dimly lit, full of laughter and music. I was mid-conversation when I felt that familiar shift in the air, that sudden awareness you get when someone who used to mean everything is suddenly in the same room. I turned, and there he was. Kevin Bennett. He looked almost the same, but not quite. The shine was gone. His smile looked forced, his shoulders heavier. When his eyes met mine, he froze. Then he smiled, slow and uncertain, like he was testing if he still had permission to. For a brief second, my chest tightened, not from love, but from memory. The human instinct to remember before you recover. He walked over, hesitating just enough to show that this wasn't confidence, it was desperation, dressed as courage. "Wendy," he said softly. "Hey." "Hey," I replied, polite but distant. "It's been a while." "A year," I said, almost exactly. He laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You still keep track." "No," I said. "I just remember the last time I saw you. Some moments don't fade." That made him go quiet. We stood there, surrounded by the noise of the party, and yet it felt like no one else existed. He finally spoke. "You look amazing, Wendy. You always did, but now you just glow." Compliments used to disarm me. Now they just bounced off. "Thanks," I said simply. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. "Listen, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry. For everything. I was stupid. I thought I needed excitement, but all I did was lose the best thing I ever had." I stayed silent. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't owe him any. "Madison and we didn't last," he added quickly, watching for my reaction. "It was a disaster. She said I didn't know how to love properly. Guess she was right." I looked at him, then really looked. The man who once mocked my predictability now looked tired, lost, chasing ghosts of what he'd ruined. "Kevin," I said gently, "I hope you learn how to love properly one day, but it won't be with me." He flinched a little. "Wendy, please, don't say that. We had something real. Maybe we just needed time apart to figure it out." "No," I said, "we didn't need time apart. We needed honesty, and you gave me cruelty instead." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You really think what I said back then defined everything? People say stupid things when they're scared. Scared of what I asked, of settling, of getting it wrong, of being stuck." "Then you should have chosen someone worth hurting," I said quietly, "because I was the one who stayed Kevin. I believed in you even when you didn't, but you were so busy running from the idea of forever, you never noticed someone who would have stayed for it." He looked away, jaw tight. "So that's it? You're just walking away again?" "No," I said, smiling faintly. "This time I'm not walking away. I'm just done standing still." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached out and gently touched his arm the way someone might touch an old photograph before putting it back in a box. "You were right, Kevin," I whispered. "I was your starter girlfriend, but you were my final mistake." I turned to leave. He called after me, voice breaking just slightly. "Wendy, wait." But I didn't, because there are some words you can't unhear and some doors that lock the moment you finally learn your worth. As I walked away, the noise of the party faded into a blur, laughter music, clinking glasses. Somewhere behind me, Kevin stood still watching. Maybe he finally understood what it felt like to be left behind. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it wasn't my story to finish anymore. It's been 3 years since that night at the party. 3 years since I looked Kevin Bennett in the eyes and finally closed a chapter that had haunted me far too long. Sometimes I still think about that younger version of myself. The girl who stayed up late rewriting his resume, who defended him when his friends made jokes at her expense, who believed that love was something you could earn through patience and loyalty. I don't hate her. I just wish I could tell her sooner that love doesn't have to feel like proving your worth. Life looks different now. My apartment is small, but warm plants on the windowsill, books stacked in corners, a life that feels entirely mine. I got promoted last year. My name is on the door of my own office now. On weekends I travel. Alone sometimes, with friends other times. I take photos not to post them, but to remember how it felt to belong to myself again. And yes, I eventually met someone new. Not someone perfect, not someone flashy, someone kind, someone who doesn't need to outshine a room to make me feel seen. But the truth is, even if I hadn't met him, I'd still be okay. Because peace, I've learned, isn't found in another person's arms. It's found in the quiet confidence of knowing you can stand alone. A few months ago, I ran into one of Kevin's old friends. She said he's been doing fine, new job, new apartment, still chasing distractions. She mentioned he's single now. I smiled and said, "That makes sense." She laughed, not understanding. But I did. Because some people don't change, they just cycle through lessons they refuse to learn. And some of us only need to learn the lesson once. Sometimes I think back to that night in the car, the hum of the radio, the way he smirked when he called me his starter girlfriend. I used to replay that moment with anger. Now I replay it with gratitude. Because he was right, I was his starter girlfriend. But not in the way he meant. I was the one who taught him what love requires and what happens when you treat it carelessly. I was the one who reminded him that good people eventually stop waiting to be seen. And he unknowingly became the start of something too, the start of the woman I was meant to become. So when people ask me about my past, I smile. I don't talk about heartbreak. I talk about awakening. Because being called someone's starter girlfriend once broke me, but it also rebuilt me. And in the end, I realized something simple but powerful. You can't control how someone sees you, but you can control when to stop letting their blindness define your worth. I've stopped looking back. But every now and then, when the city lights reflect against my window and the night is quiet, I whisper a little thank you. Not to Kevin, but to the version of me who finally walked away. She was the real beginning. He called me his starter girlfriend. But really, he was my starter lesson, the one that taught me never to settle for being almost enough. You're just too boring for me. Long term, he said. At the time, I laughed, thinking it was just one of his teasing comments. But that night, when I saw how serious his eyes were, something in me cracked. My name is Deborah Grant. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that stability can feel like a curse in the wrong hands. I've never been the spontaneous type. I don't book flights on a whim or dance on bar counters just to feel alive. I'm the one who remembers birthdays, waters plants, and keeps extra batteries in the drawer just in case. For the longest time, I thought that made me dependable. Apparently, to some people, it just makes you boring. When I met Richard, he said that was what he loved about me, that I was the calm in his storm. He had this infectious energy, the kind of man who could walk into any room and make everyone turn toward him. And at first, I thought we balanced each other. He'd bring adventure, I'd bring peace. It felt like harmony until it didn't. We'd been together a little over 2 years when it happened. That evening, I made dinner something simple but thoughtful. Spaghetti with roasted garlic and parmesan the way he liked it. I'd even picked up a bottle of red wine because I wanted the night to feel special. Richard sat on the couch scrolling through his phone while I cleared the dishes. Richard, I said, drying my hands on a towel, I've been thinking, maybe we should move in together. He didn't even look up at first. Move in, he repeated like I'd just asked him to run away to Mars. Yeah, I said, smiling nervously. We spend most nights together anyway. It just makes sense. He finally set his phone down, smirking. Deborah, you're sweet. But come on, you really think living together would work? I frowned. Why wouldn't it? He leaned back, arms stretched lazily over the couch. Because honestly, you're just too safe for me long term. The words hit like a slap. Safe, I echoed. He shrugged, as if explaining something obvious. You're dependable. You plan everything. You like routines. And that's nice, I guess. But I don't want nice forever. I want passion. I want sparks. I want someone who makes me feel like life's unpredictable. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. None came. He smiled, almost pityingly. Don't take it the wrong way. You're perfect for now, but not for always. Something inside me went quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there trying to process that the man I'd loved for 2 years was describing me like a placeholder in his timeline. Finally, I said quietly, So, what exactly are we doing then? He laughed an easy, careless sound. Deborah, relax. Why do you always have to turn things into something serious? We're having fun, aren't we? Let's just enjoy it. Fun. That word twisted in my chest. To him, I was a chapter. To me, he was the whole story. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, something crisp and arrogant. I kept hearing his voice replaying in my mind. You're just too safe. And for the first time, I wondered if being safe was a bad thing, or if I'd just chosen someone who only valued chaos. The next morning, I made coffee while he scrolled through his phone again, laughing at something on social media. I tried to act normal, asking, "What's so funny?" He grinned. Madison sent a video. She's crazy. You'd like it. Madison, his ex. He still talked to her as friends, or so he said. I told myself not to read into it. But there was a light in his eyes when he said her name, the kind that used to be there when he looked at me. Over the next few weeks, that light dimmed for me and grew for her. Our Friday nights, once filled with movies and laughter, turned into him saying, I'm meeting some people from work. Don't wait up. He'd come home past midnight smelling of alcohol and someone else's perfume. I told myself not to overthink. I told myself that love requires patience. But deep down, something darker whispered, he's already halfway gone. I stopped bringing up moving in. I stopped asking about his nights out. I started walking on eggshells in my own relationship, quiet, careful, waiting for him to remember that I was enough. But he didn't. One evening, while I was folding laundry, he came home beaming. You should have seen Madison tonight, he said, tossing his jacket aside. She jumped on the bar and started singing. Everyone was cheering. I forced a small smile. Sounds wild. He chuckled. Yeah, she just makes everything feel electric. You'd never do something like that. That one stung more than I wanted to admit. I turned back to the laundry, pressing a wrinkle flat with shaking hands. He didn't even notice. Later that night, I sat by the window, city lights flickering in the distance. The reflection, staring back at me, looked like a ghost, the version of myself I'd slowly muted for him. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed awake, waiting for him, all the quiet dinners, all the little things I did, hoping he'd see how much I cared. And for what? To be called boring. Maybe that's when it truly hit me. I was building a future with someone who never intended to stay in it. The next morning, he kissed my forehead casually before heading out. Don't wait up, he said without even looking back. And for once I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table long after the door shut behind him, the silence pressing heavy around me. It was strange that silence used to scare me, but now it felt almost comforting. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for his voice to fill it. I didn't know it yet, but that silence would become my greatest weapon. It's funny how you can spend years building something, only to watch it crumble quietly in the background while you pretend not to see it happening. That was my life for the next few weeks. Richard and I still called each other boyfriend and girlfriend, but what we had wasn't a relationship anymore. It was a memory we were both too lazy to let go of. He started spending more nights out with coworkers. He said it like an apology, though his tone made it clear he wasn't actually sorry. At first, I tried to act understanding. You've been working hard, I said. You deserve some time to relax. He'd smile, kiss my cheek absently, and vanish into the night with a scent of cologne stronger than usual. I told myself it was fine. I told myself not to be the controlling girlfriend. But every time he left, the silence in my apartment got louder. The dinner I'd made would go cold, the wine would stay unopened, and I'd sit there imagining him laughing with Madison, the woman who could sing on bars and make chaos look glamorous. I hated that image, but I couldn't shake it. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust what he wanted. 2. Fridays later, I decided to surprise him at the bar he said he was going to. I'd never done something like that before. It felt desperate out of character, but my gut wouldn't let me rest. The moment I stepped inside, I saw him, and her. Madison was easy to spot tall, glowing in the way women do when they know all eyes are on them. Richard was leaning close, saying something in her ear, and she laughed that kind of laugh that pulls the whole room into it. He looked alive in a way he hadn't looked with me in months. I froze by the doorway. I could have stormed over. I could have shouted, but instead I just stood there, invisible, in a place that used to feel safe because of him. Then I turned around and left. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that word safe. He'd said it like it was an insult, like stability was a cage instead of a home. But as I stared at the empty side of my bed, I realized something else. He didn't want calm. He wanted chaos disguised as passion. And Madison was chaos personified. Still, I couldn't bring myself to end it, not yet. Because part of me, the naive part still clinging to hope, wanted him to choose me without being forced to. I wanted to believe that love was enough to outlast temptation. I wanted him to remember who I was before Madison reminded him of who he used to be. The next morning, he texted casually. Didn't make it home last night. Crashed at Ben's place after drinks. No apology, no explanation, just an update as if it were normal. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers trembling over the keyboard before typing. Okay, hope you had fun. Then I deleted it. He didn't deserve even that much of my energy. A week later, he showed up at my apartment, acting like nothing was wrong. He brought coffee and croissants like it was some peace offering. We sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with things neither of us wanted to say. He leaned back, sighing. You've been quiet lately. Everything okay? I looked at him. The nerve of that question almost made me laugh. I'm fine, I said, lying smoothly. Just thinking a lot. About what I shrugged. Us. He frowned. Oh God, not one of those talks again. That made something in me snap. One of those talks, I repeated. Richard, you called me boring for wanting to move forward. You disappear every weekend and act like I'm the problem for caring. He rubbed his forehead, exhaling. Deborah, please don't make this dramatic. You're overthinking again. Am I? I asked, my voice shaking now. Because it kind of feels like you've already checked out. He hesitated, a flicker of guilt, but it vanished just as quickly. You always twist everything into something heavy, he muttered. That's what I mean, you take the fun out of things. I stared at him, feeling something cold and unfamiliar crawl up my spine. You want fun, I said quietly, but you don't want love. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. Do you still talk to Madison? I asked. He blinked clearly, not expecting it. What does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it, I said. Because every time you say her name, you light up in ways you never do with me. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You're jealous. She's just a friend. Then why do you sound happier talking about her than you do talking to me? He stood up, shaking his head. You know what, I can't do this right now. Yeah, I said, standing too. I think that's the problem. You never can. When the door closed behind him, I expected to cry, but I didn't. I just sat back down at the table, staring at the coffee he'd brought, now gone cold. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt empty, like someone had turned off the noise in my head and left nothing but quiet. That night, I didn't wait for his text. I didn't check if he'd seen my stories or liked my posts. Instead, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in months. I keep trying to calm his storm, but maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe I'm supposed to leave it and save myself. When I put the pen down, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. A few days later, he called. Hey, he said casually, you've been distant. Did I do something? I almost laughed. Richard, you've done many things, he sighed. Deborah, I don't want to fight. I just want us to be okay. Then stop treating me like I'm the boring alternative, I said softly. Because I'm not. He went silent. For once, he didn't have a snappy comeback. Finally, he said, I'll call you later. But he didn't, and I didn't wait. That weekend, I passed a bar downtown and heard music spilling out, someone singing loudly off-key, but joyful. When I peeked through the window, I saw Madison standing on a chair, surrounded by laughter, and right beside her, Richard watching her like she was the sun. I didn't stay to see the rest. I walked away before anyone noticed me, before I could start convincing myself that I wasn't replaceable. Because maybe I was, to him, but maybe that wasn't the tragedy I once thought it was. Maybe it was freedom. When you love someone who doesn't value peace, you start mistaking chaos for connection. That's how I spent the last few weeks with Richard, waiting for moments of calm that never lasted long enough to feel real. He still texted me occasionally, still dropped by with that effortless charm that once made me melt. But every time he smiled, I could tell it wasn't for me anymore. It was for whoever was on the other end of his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The nights felt longer, the bed colder. Even when he was there, his mind wasn't. I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, that love could survive through exhaustion, through distance, through one-sided effort. But then one evening, when the air between us felt like smoke, I decided to stop lying to myself. He came over after work, his shirt half untucked, smelling faintly of whiskey. Rough day, I asked. Not really, he said, tossing his keys on the counter. Just drinks with Madison and a few people from the office. The name hit me like a pebble dropped in still water. Tiny ripples of hurt spread across the surface of my heart, but I didn't show it. Do you ever hear yourself? I asked quietly. He looked confused. What do you mean? You talk about her like she's the only part of your life that still excites you. He groaned. Deborah, not this again. You're reading too much into everything. No, I said, standing now. I'm finally reading it exactly as it is. He frowned, clearly irritated. You really can't stand it when I have female friends, can you? I laughed softly. Friends. Is that what you call it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The kind of quiet fury that doesn't scream, it just ends things. So I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Are you seeing her? He stared at me for a long moment before replying. Not officially. But she makes me feel alive in ways you never could. That was it. There it was, the truth I'd been dragging out of him piece by piece. He said it like it was freedom, but for me it was clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything or beg him to stay. I just nodded once and said, Then you've already made your choice. He blinked, caught off guard. Wait, what? I'm not going to compete for someone who's already decided I'm not enough. Deborah, come on, he said, trying to laugh it off. You're overreacting. It's not that serious. I tilted my head slightly. It's serious enough for me. There was a silence so sharp it could cut glass. He looked away, first muttering, You'll regret walking away. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least I'll be walking towards something honest. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, the apartment was quiet again. That's when I noticed how peaceful that silence felt. No tension, no second guessing, just air. I looked around at all the things that used to make me feel connected to him. The coffee mug he left, the sweater draped on the chair, the toothbrush beside mine. And for the first time, instead of feeling comfort, I felt the weight of everything I'd been carrying alone. I started packing that night, not in a frenzy, but carefully, methodically. Every folded shirt, every picture frame was a decision to reclaim myself. When I found one of his notes from months ago, "You're my calm place," I almost laughed. He said he loved my calmness, then punished me for not being chaos. The irony wasn't lost on me. By midnight, my suitcase was full. I took one last look around the apartment that had held so many versions of me, hopeful, patient, heartbroken, and whispered, "You wanted excitement, Richard. I hope you find it." Then I left my key on the counter and walked out. The first night alone was the hardest. I stayed in a small rental room with peeling paint and a mattress that creaked. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was mine, and that was enough. When the sun rose, it felt different. Like I'd finally stepped out of a storm I didn't realize I'd been standing in. For days after Richard didn't call, he didn't text, and I didn't expect him to. He was probably busy chasing electric nights with Madison, drowning himself in the kind of chaos he called passion. Meanwhile, I found myself relearning silence, learning that peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of fear. The first few mornings I woke up reaching for a phone that didn't buzz anymore, but slowly that ache started to dull. Because the truth was, the more distance I put between us, the more I could finally hear myself. 3 weeks later, I saw a photo online. Richard and Madison. They were laughing in a bar, her hand on his chest, his head thrown back in laughter. The caption read, "Finally living life to the fullest." I stared at it for exactly 5 seconds before closing the app. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and smiled quietly. Because what he didn't know was that I was finally living too, just differently. And as the steam from my mug fogged the glass, I whispered to myself, he didn't see it coming. But the best goodbye is the one where you never look back. People always talk about heartbreak like it's loud, like it's shouting, crying, throwing things. But mine wasn't. Mine was quiet. Just me, my thoughts, and an apartment that didn't echo with his voice anymore. And for the first few weeks, that silence felt unbearable. I'd wake up every morning expecting a text from Richard, some meaningless "hey" or "miss you" that would give me permission to pretend the breakup hadn't happened. But it never came. At first, I kept my phone nearby, checking it every hour, then every few hours. Eventually, I just left it in another room. Because the truth was waiting for him was like waiting for rain in a drought. You convince yourself it's coming just to survive another day. The silence, though, began to change shape. At first, it was sharp and painful. It reminded me of everything I'd lost: his laughter, our inside jokes, the rhythm of having someone always there. But slowly the silence softened. It became something else. Space. Space to breathe. Space to think about who I had been before I tried to fit into his version of love. I started small. A walk in the morning before work. A cup of coffee in a cafe I used to love but stopped visiting because he didn't like the parking there. Little things. Tiny rebellions against the version of myself that only existed in his shadow. After a week, I joined a yoga class. After 2, I signed up for the gym. It wasn't about changing my body. It was about feeling like I had control over something again. At first, I felt awkward, out of place among people who seemed to already know what they were doing. But every drop of sweat felt like proof that I was still here, still capable of rebuilding, still capable of choosing myself. My friends noticed before I did. "You're glowing lately," my best friend Lauren said one night over dinner. "Like you've finally exhaled after holding your breath for too long." I laughed, a little self-conscious. "Maybe I have." She tilted her head. "Have you heard from him?" "No," I said. "And I'm not checking." That made her smile. "Good. Let him miss the woman who learned to love her own peace." Weeks passed, then months. And one morning I realized I hadn't thought about Richard for an entire day. Not once. That's when I knew I was healing. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of freedom, no montage-worthy moment. Just quiet mornings that didn't hurt anymore, evenings that didn't ache with loneliness. Just calm. Every now and then, I'd hear about him through mutual friends. Apparently, he and Madison were inseparable, always posting photos from bars, concerts, parties. "Honestly, it looks exhausting," one friend said. I smiled politely, but said nothing. because deep down I already knew how that story ended. People who chase chaos eventually get burned by it. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to watch it happen. Instead, I filled my time with things I'd forgotten I loved: books, painting, weekend hikes. I even started learning guitar again, something I'd put away years ago because Richard once joked I wasn't the artsy type. It's strange how much you can shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone without realizing it. But silence has a way of showing you who you were before the noise. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch myself thinking about him not with pain, but with gratitude, because losing him had forced me to rediscover myself. He'd called me boring, but I was finally learning that being boring meant having peace. It meant quiet mornings instead of screaming matches, consistency instead of confusion, stability instead of storms. Maybe I wasn't too safe for love. Maybe he was just too reckless to recognize what love really looked like. 3 months after the breakup, I stood in front of my mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, though I did, but because I felt different. My eyes were steadier. My smile was real. I didn't flinch at my reflection anymore. The woman staring back at me wasn't waiting for anyone to choose her. She had already chosen herself. And in that silence, the one that once felt unbearable, I finally heard the most peaceful sound in the world. My own heartbeat. Steady, strong, free. 6 months. That's how long it took for the silence I'd built to reach him. I wasn't looking for updates about Richard anymore, but sometimes life doesn't wait for permission to show you how the story ends. It started with a text from Lauren. "You won't believe this," Madison posted some messy breakup quotes. "Looks like your ex finally got his dose of chaos." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, smiling faintly at how predictable it all was. Not long after the messages began. At first, it was almost polite. "Richard, hey, hope you're doing okay. Been thinking about you lately." Richard, "You always made life feel calm. I miss that." I stared at the words on my screen. The same man who once told me I was too safe now missed the calm he'd mocked. I didn't answer, because silence, I'd learned, was louder than any reply. A week later, another message arrived. "Richard, I know I hurt you. Madison wasn't who I thought she was. I made mistakes. Can we talk?" I put my phone face down and went back to painting. Each brushstroke was smoother than his words ever were. He wasn't reaching out because he loved me. He was reaching out because his chaos had burned him. Then came the calls. Unknown numbers, late-night voicemails. His voice was quieter now, thinner, as if regret had hollowed him out. "Deborah, I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm sorry. I was stupid. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." For a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the night he laughed at me for wanting a home together, the way he said boring like it was poison, and the pity disappeared. He didn't stop there. Mutual friends started sending messages on his behalf. "Hey, Richard's been trying to reach you. He's not doing great. Can't you just talk to him once?" Even his mother commented on one of my photos online. "Madison was a mistake. You were the kind of woman he needed. Please give him a chance." I deleted the comment without replying, because what no one seemed to understand was that I didn't need closure. I already had it. It came the moment I realized I didn't miss him anymore. A few weeks later, I saw him in person by accident. I was walking out of a bookstore when he appeared from the crowd like a ghost from a past life. He looked different, thinner. Tired eyes clouded with exhaustion instead of arrogance. "Wow," he said softly. "You look amazing." "Thank you," I replied, calm and steady. He gave a nervous laugh. "Guess you've been doing well." "I have," I said simply. He hesitated, then took a step closer. "Deborah, listen, I know I messed up. Madison, she cheated on me, lied to me, used me." His voice cracked slightly like he was telling me something tragic, but all I heard was irony. "I'm sorry that happened," I said. I realize now what I had. You were everything I needed, and I threw it away for something fake." I tilted my head. "You didn't throw it away, Richard. You traded it, and you got exactly what you paid for." He flinched the truth, slicing sharper than anger ever could. "I want to make things right," he said desperately. "Just one more chance." I took a breath, then smiled faintly. "You had your chance. You used it to tell me I was boring." His eyes filled with something that looked like regret or maybe panic. "You really won't even think about it." I shook my head. "No, Richard. I already did. That's why I'm free." That night, I lit a candle and opened my journal again, the same one I'd written in the night I left him. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, The man who called me safe is now begging for shelter, but peace doesn't wait for those who once feared it. When I put the pen down, I realized something. His chaos no longer touched me, not even a ripple. A few days later, another message arrived. Richard, I understand. I wish you nothing but happiness. You deserve it. I didn't respond, but I whispered a quiet truth to myself. I already found it. Because for the first time, happiness wasn't a person. It was me, my silence, my peace, my life rebuilt brick by quiet brick. And somewhere out there, while Richard was finally learning what real loneliness felt like, I was learning that the best revenge is simply never needing one. A year after I walked away from Richard, life had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. My mornings began with calm instead of anxiety. My evenings ended with peace instead of questions. And somewhere between the silence and the sunlight, I realized I hadn't just survived heartbreak, I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of it. When Tyler, one of our mutual friends, sent an invitation to his engagement party, I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to avoid the risk of running into Richard. But then another voice whispered, "Why hide from the past when you've already outgrown it?" So I went. The party was held at a small rooftop venue, glowing under string lights and laughter. Music drifted through the air, soft and warm. When I walked in, people turned to look. A few double takes, a few compliments. It wasn't vanity that made me notice, it was realization. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet background girl in someone else's story. I was the one who had learned to stand in her own light. And then I saw him, Richard. He was standing near the bar, talking too fast, laughing too loud. The same old performance. But the years had left marks on him that charm couldn't cover. He looked older, duller. His once confident grin had faded into something forced. When his eyes found mine, his whole expression shifted. "Wow," he breathed, stepping closer. "Deborah, you look incredible." "Thank you," I said, polite but distant. There was a long pause. The music carried on between us, but it felt like we were standing in another world, the one we'd both left behind. He ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I'm glad I did." He gave a nervous laugh. "Guess you've been doing well." "I have," I said simply. You look happy." "I am." His smile faltered a little. "I'm glad. You deserve it." I could tell he wanted to say more, so I waited. He hesitated, eyes lowering. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For calling you boring, for pushing you away, for all of it." I studied him quietly. The man in front of me wasn't the same one I'd once loved. That Richard had been careless, untouchable. This one looked lost. "I appreciate that," I said gently. He exhaled in relief, taking a small step closer. "Madison and I, we didn't last. She cheated, lied, drained me dry. It was chaos. You were right. You were always right." I tilted my head slightly. "You said once that you didn't want safe, that you wanted someone who made you feel alive." He winced. "Yeah, I was an idiot." "Maybe not," I said softly. "You just wanted fireworks. You never realized how quickly they burn out." He swallowed hard. "Deborah, I miss what we had, you and me. The peace, the trust, the calm. I didn't know how much I needed that until I lost it." His voice broke a little. "Can we start over?" For a moment, I looked at him and saw flashes of the man I used to love, the small moments that once made me stay. But then I remembered the woman who waited in silence for a love that never respected her peace. So I smiled sadly. "No, Richard, we can't." He blinked. "Why not? You forgave me, didn't you?" "I did," I said. "But forgiveness isn't an invitation to return." He looked genuinely hurt now, like he'd expected me to crumble the way I used to. "I've changed," he said quickly. "I can make it right this time." I shook my head. "You don't need to. You already taught me what I needed to learn." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, meeting his eyes, "that peace isn't boring. It's sacred. And I won't trade it for chaos ever again." He stared at me speechless, and for the first time I didn't see power in his silence, I saw defeat. I stepped back and smiled politely. "Take care of yourself, Richard." Then I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels soft against the floor, steady, certain, final. Behind me, I could feel his gaze lingering heavy with what-ifs, but I didn't look back. Because the real ending wasn't about him losing me. It was about me finally realizing he no longer had any hold on me. Later that night, I stood alone by the railing, watching city lights shimmer below. The air was cool, calm, the kind of night I used to dream of when my heart was still in pieces. And for the first time, I felt entirely whole. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and smiled to myself. He once said I was too safe, I whispered. But that safe life, he mocked, became the life I always wanted. And as laughter echoed behind me and music floated through the air, I realized the story wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about peace, about growth, about finally being the storm and the calm all on my own.